I want to start off with LSU, Mason, because I think it warrants the question: what's going on with the Tigers and BK? Coming off of a 9-4 season, 5-3 in the SEC, get the win in the bowl game, the Texas Bowl over the Baylor Bears. Um, I think it was kind of a ho hum year in 2024, and the defense was to blame for the most part. I mean, there was a stretch where the offense didn't do so well. You had so many weapons out wide that you thought Garrett Nussmeier was going to be able to have a little bit more success through that middle stretch of the season, but I think he was cutting his teeth, man. This guy's a gunslinger. He's going to sling it into traffic every once in a while. And he hit a little stretch there where it was a bit of a lull, and the team really struggled, right? Because this was an offensive minded football team. If they weren't scoring 40 something points, they weren't going to win. I mean, against Baylor, they gave up 31 points there in the bowl game. And, I know it's a bowl game and all, and there's players that sit out and all that good stuff. That's great. I get it. But Baylor deals with the same thing that LSU deals with players sitting out, right? So, it's not something exclusive to LSU. And in that game, they got to score, over 30 points to win. And that was kind of the mantra for this team in 2024. The defense was just lacking, and it was extremely inconsistent. Um, but all in all, eh, over so far in Brian Kelly's LSU stint, you got to be pretty happy, but I think everything kind of points to the 2025 season. And that's why we wanted to kind of talk about them today. I think they're a playoff bubble team, Mason, with Garrett
Mhm.
Nussmeier making his way back, this season. We'll kind of talk more about that here in a second. We're going to pull up the 2025 schedule and kind of go through some of the games and things like that. But there's some drama going on, man. And so I want to kind of talk about it and look, this is a negative topic. And these premier programs, LSU is definitely one of those. Georgia, Ohio State, we've seen a lot of, issues, snafus, if you will, so far in the offseason with a coach, dealing with whatever that was at Ohio State. This stuff happens, is my point. The only way to keep this stuff, and we're going to talk about what that stuff is if y'all don't know. Let's kind of unpack that, and we'll kind of continue to talk about this. But Greg Brooks was a guy that played for LSU back in 2023. He was named a captain for the 2023 season, and then right as the 2023 season began, he had some issues at practice where he felt and the staff felt as though he incurred, I guess, vertigo is what they called it originally. He was throwing up at practice, had some issues, blah, blah, blah. Okay, I'm not a doctor, so I'm not going to sit here and explain vertigo to you, but that was what was originally said was his issue. And then lo and behold, it turns out after I forget how many days, 39 days or something like that, they finally send him to a neurologist and figure out he's got brain cancer, right? He's got a tumor in the brain, and that's terrible. I mean, that's just absolutely awful. Well, fast forward 16 months, 17 months, whatever it was, and 6 days ago, you've got Greg Brooks Sr., Brooks Jr. going on Good Morning America, right? And basically saying that Brian Kelly is MIA as far as Greg Brooks is concerned. Hasn't called him, hasn't checked on him, hasn't done any of these things, and then it has apparently upset Greg Brooks Sr. Um, um, I'll read some of the quotes, and you can see them here on your screen. Greg Brooks Sr. Said of LSU's head football coach, "My son almost lost his life. Coach, where are you? Forget about football. Pick up the phone and say you love the kid, man." And that was his main complaint against Brian Kelly. Um, Now the lawsuit comes in where they're suing, I guess, the medical staff there at LSU, and they're suing the hospital. And forgive me, I forgot the name, but it's the local hospital there, very very close to the university, and does all of their surgeries and things like that. Um, so let's read a quote here from Greg Brooks Jr. I just want young athletes in the same spot I was. If something is hurting, tell them, Brooks Jr. said in an interview with Good Morning America, referring to coaches and school officials. And if they don't do anything about it, go get your second opinion, because if I would have known that, I wouldn't be the way I am right now. And so there's where the lawsuit comes in. He's saying that there was gross negligence on the part of the LSU staff. Now, again, I just want to say, I mean, this is terrible, right? This is absolutely terrible stuff. Brian Kelly comes out about 2-3 days ago at the time of this recording, and basically, and you can read the top part here, and it's a lot of, I won't say coach speak. I'm not saying it's insincere. I don't know. It's just it's something that's you would expect the top, the majority of this quote, but the end here is where this is what I was thinking about, Mason. I read this quote from Brian Kelly, and I literally thought to myself, he did what I do with my wife when I'm in an argument with my wife. I say everything really logical, nice and explained out. I say it in the nicest way possible, and then at the very end, I just have to get in that, hmm. And that's where Brian
Twist the
Kelly
knife
messed
a
up
little
here,
bit.
man. Do what?
Mm-hmm. So just twist the knife a little bit.
Well, yeah, it's just like, final little poke in the ribs. He says, you can question me as a football coach. You can question me in terms of things that we do on the field. But off the field, as a parent, as a husband, as somebody that is actively involved in every community that I've been involved with, this is where the line is drawn with me. And that I don't think any of that really needed to be said necessarily. But I digress. It's not something that's going to teeter this lawsuit or anything like that. Well, the lawyers are going to do what they're going to do. The investigation's going to go the way it goes, and they're going to get to the bottom of if there was negligence or not. There's a group of people on the internet that feel like Greg Brooks Sr. is out there looking for the money. And look, guys, I don't know, you know, yeah, he is. Is it for a good reason? It seems like it. There's probably going to be a settlement here. I doubt this thing ever even makes it to court. I mean, the hospitals obviously have the best lawyers in the game. So, with all this being said, Mason, this is a lot of negative. And what I was
Mm-hmm.
going to say just a couple of minutes ago was all this negative stuff can be overlooked by a really, maybe it's sad to say this, but it can be overlooked by winning in 2025. If Brian Kelly was in the playoffs this past season or even won a playoff game, and the things would be a little bit different. They just would. We've watched Kirby Smart at Georgia deal with stuff, but he goes out and he wins and goes to the playoff a lot, and he wins SEC championships and things like that. And so these things are kind of thrown into the back seat. What are your thoughts on Brian Kelly? And we're going to talk more here in just a second about the good things that are going on for LSU, because there are a lot of good things going on for the football program as far as talent acquisition and things like that. Still some holes in the roster. We're going to talk about that here in a second. We'll look at the schedule. But what are your thoughts on Brian Kelly so far, at LSU? This past year was his third season. And what do you think, about this situation, I guess, in general, and the shadow that it casts on the LSU Tigers?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, it's incredibly difficult to imagine what Brooks is going through. Um, and his dad, if the allegations are true that LSU completely abandoned this kid for 16 months and they had to go hire an attorney to get any sort of recognition from the university and from the program, that's incredibly sad. It seems like Brian Kelly is saying that that was not true. I don't know why the allegations would come up if that wasn't true. Maybe they feel like the program, the university didn't do enough to help in this situation. But from what it looks like, Greg Brooks is having to go through a ton of rehabilitation to get his motor skills back, to learn how to speak and walk and do all these things over again. It's a long rehab process through the brain surgery and whatnot. And I'm not a doctor. I can't speak to when he'll be or if he'll be 100% again, but he's permanently disabled to some degree, and that's really tough for any young kid to go through. And as far as we know, this was not a football related brain cancer, right? So it's not like this is anything that LSU should take responsibility for, or college football as a sport should take responsibility for. It's just a rare brain cancer that unfortunately happened to this young kid. Now, Greg Brooks also played 3 seasons at Arkansas. Played, I think it was like 48 games at Arkansas and only two at LSU. So a lot of his tenure was from the Arkansas, from his stint at Arkansas, and so he probably had more relationships and things like that with that coaching staff, with those players. Probably got a call from Sam Pittman at some point. I have a hard time believing that when he transferred to LSU, he just meshed right in with that team, and was everybody's favorite player and all that. So I think it would have been easy for a coaching staff to maybe not show as much attention to him as they would, let's say, if this happened to Garrett Nussmeier, right? The entire community would be more around that individual player, as opposed to a transfer in who they saw for a couple of games, never really got to know the guy. And then he goes out with brain cancer. Not saying that makes it right at all to just neglect the kid, but you see where I'm getting at. If he had stayed at Arkansas, I don't think that he would have gotten a similar treatment at Arkansas that he got at LSU, because he was kind of the new kid there. Nobody really knew him. He didn't establish himself as a player. Um,
And Brian
say I
Kelly
say
was
all
still
that
relatively new as well. I mean,
exactly. Yeah.
you know, Brian Kelly certainly didn't have a very, very close relationship with Greg Brooks. I'm almost positive. So,
Right.
yeah, I agree with you for sure.
But you would hope that uh, an occasional phone call would happen, just to say, hey, just checking on you. Um, you would think that someone from the university would be there every step of the way, helping out in any way that they can. If that didn't happen, I think it's personally sad, but professionally, I don't really. I mean, it sounds heartless, but I don't know that Brian Kelly has any sort of obligation to sit there and hold his hand throughout everything. Um, I don't know. I'm kind of torn on it. I don't think it should
And
affect
BK
the
also,
season.
Mason, says that there was a staffer there with him, in contact with him every week throughout this process,
Right.
but it wasn't Brian Kelly. And
Yeah.
that's where Greg Brooks Sr. has got the beef, it wasn't BK himself checking on his son. And, you know, this is going to
Yeah.
be a situation, that's going to be a little messy here in the end. There's just, I mean, it already is. It already is.
Yeah. It's a bad look on Brian Kelly. It's a bad look on LSU for future recruits looking at the program, wondering how he connects with players. I've never thought of Brian Kelly as a huge players coach, right? I don't
Yeah.
think he's somebody who just connects in a way that Dan Lanning would, or in a way that even a Ryan Day might. Um, that's just not Brian Kelly. I think he's more of a CEO type. And you put him in a situation like this, and yeah, he would probably be the most awkward of head coaches that I could count or list by name. Um, However, if this were Sam Pittman, I think you would have gotten a completely different side. And uh, I hate it for the young man because he left Arkansas to go to LSU. Had he stayed at Arkansas, I think the treatment would have been completely different, for reasons, because I think Sam Pittman's just a more personable guy, and also because, like I said before, he would have had the team around him and the relationships around him that could have really made a difference in his rehab and whatnot.
Yeah. Well, with all that being said, I do think that there's a lot of positive going on at LSU right now, and that's why we wanted to talk about them today. Because I mean, at 9-4 last year, that's not a terrible season anyway. I mean, there's a lot of programs that would kill to win 9 games, right? Just a ton of them, and LSU. I think has got a pretty good chance, if they can shore up the defense of making a push for the playoff. I'm not sure that they can make the 12. They can make it, but I'm not sure that they will, I guess is a better way to phrase that. But looking at some of the stuff that's going on there in a positive note, the transfer portal is just bumping for LSU, and they're number one in the country, as you can see on your screen there. 10 4-star commitments, 5 3-star commitments there, puts them at number one over Ole Miss, the transfer portal king, and Lane Kiffin. So, I mean, there is some good going on. I just kind of looking at some of those guys that you've got coming in. I still have some questions, and I'm not gonna hold back on that. I mean, the defensive line is still an issue for LSU, and not only is it still an issue, but the issue hasn't really been addressed. So, if you look at the LSU transfer, um, the transfer portal class that they've put together, um, it seems like the secondary was a big point of contention, right? They needed to, and they did. Every part of this defense, I think, minus maybe your starting guys there on the linebacker core. There was obviously some real. You got Whit Weeks making his way back. He kind of put America on notice last year with 117 tackles and a good piece there in the middle, right? The secondary and the very back of the defense and the very front of the defense was what was so poor. And LSU is still hasn't they still haven't addressed this defensive line issue, Mason. And not only did they not address it, they've got players, that have left. Right? Jalen Lee, I think is his name. He transfers out there at kind of the 11th hour of the transfer portal class. So a lot of my concerns for LSU that I had going into last season, we both had. We talked about it at nauseum, really. A lot of those problems still exist, at least on that defensive line. Are they going to be better in the secondary? I sure hope so. I think they will. I sure hope so. Blake Baker, I think I've got faith in the guy. I do. But we're going to have to see them hit right on a lot of these defensive players that came through the transfer portal. One of which, you and look, let me clarify too. The defensive line, the edges are not bad. And the edges weren't really terrible last year. And I think you improved those even more this season with bringing in Patrick Payton over from Florida State. I mean, that's a nice piece there on the edge. It's the middle of that defensive line, man. It's a problem. And I'm sitting here, excuse me, I'm sitting here going through these transfers, and you got another edge player in Jack Pyburn coming over from Florida. Excuse me, guys. I'm sorry. I'm burping over here, but I just don't see those defensive linemen, man. You got JBR Suggs coming up, or he left. Okay, he's another one that left. Jalen Lee left with him. I just don't see it, man. So Brian Kelly still is struggling to address those issues. There is clearly a talent acquisition issue on the defensive line. This is the second year in a row we've watched LSU sit on their hands in the transfer portal and not go get a defensive lineman. I don't know what's up with that, man. I don't know what's going on with that, but they can't seem to get one. What are your thoughts there? And what do you think about the portal class? I mean, there's a lot of good in here. Don't get me wrong. I mean, LSU gets another great wide receiver, Nick Anderson. I mean, beautiful. That's an awesome thing. You think the Georgia Bulldogs wouldn't kill to have a Nick Anderson, right? I mean, there's other teams that would just die to have some of the talented skilled position players that LSU has got. But it seems like this team is still missing a little bit of that core, right? The core strength that you need to compete in the SEC all year and eventually go to SEC championship and the playoff and things like that. There still seems to be some holes, specifically defensively.
Yeah, I agree. And if you look at who LSU lost, I mean, it wasn't much, but you mentioned the defensive line. Yeah, they lost Jalen Lee. They also lost Deshaun Womack. I think that was a big loss for them coming off the edge there. And that's one that
Yeah.
you probably would have liked to have had. Probably didn't live up to his potential as a high school recruit, but he's a guy you would like back on a defense as a whole that underperformed last season. once again, but also a defensive line in particular as a group that underperformed. And outside of him, I think losing C.J. Daniels is probably the only other player that I say, yeah, I'm sure that they would have liked to have kept him. Um, but you look at what they brought in, and they got some pieces on the defensive side of the football. I think you mentioned Patrick Payton. Let's see if he can return back to kind of what he was as a high school recruit. At 6'5", 235, a lot of length, a lot of speed there, but had sort of underperformed like everybody did at Florida State. I'm wondering if a new environment sort of brings him back to sort of an NFL future type of edge player, which he certainly could be. And then Sadir Mitchell, similarly, but at Texas, kind of underperformed as an interior defensive lineman. He's at 6'6", 320, but came in as a 4-star recruit, and at least On3 has him as a 3-star transfer coming over from Texas. We'll see if he can kind of get back to prominence there and plug up some holes there for LSU. And then I really like Nick Anderson. I mean, I think he's going to be a great player coming over from OU if he can stay healthy. That was obviously a bit of an issue for the Sooners across the board for their wide receivers, but let's see what he does there. So LSU number one according to 24/7 at least number one transfer portal class overall. Um, that really stems from them losing out on Walter Nolan last year to Ole Miss, and if you recall last year, Brian Kelly threw a little bit of a fit when they lost Walter Nolan. Thought they had him. Seemed like he was coming. I believe it was Nolan. I know it was an interior defensive lineman, but I'm pretty sure it was Nolan. Anyways, he basically told all the boosters like, yeah, we lost this guy due to money, and I'm sick and tired of it. And what happens the year after that? Seems like they put their money where their mouth is, and were able to pull together a pretty good transfer class. Maybe that's what happened. I think that I don't think that should go overlooked though. When you talk about how these boosters react to the team and what's going on, what the head coach says, it seems like they definitely pulled together some money, spent in the transfer portal, and then also spent in the recruiting class. I mean,
Yeah.
according to On3,
It,
LSU ended up ninth in recruiting as well, and that's a top 10 is probably where LSU is sort of going to hover, but
I think you're
a pretty
breaking up a
strong
little bit
class
there, Mason.
overall.
There you are.
Okay.
I'm sorry. You had broke up there for just a minute, but we caught some of that. But I mean, here's my thing. It seems like LSU last year they were nowhere near the top 10 in the transfer portal class. Okay, this is a new
Hmm.
thing for LSU. Okay, they're not, and I'm not saying they haven't got good transfer players. That would be foolish. I mean, they had them one, they had two of them win Heisman's. Okay, so I'm not saying it's a new thing for transfers to go there, but number one in the country in the transfer portal class is a whole lot different than going in filling some holes. I feel like LSU's
Yeah.
approach to the transfer portal class this year was more like throw it up against the wall and see what sticks. Anybody who wants to come to LSU, best available players, come on. And I think that kind of I think that it was kind of reflected in the fact that the defensive line is still the cupboard is still fairly empty. Um, like somebody like Jalen Lee, are you heartbroken about him leaving? No, but you need depth. You got to have
Yeah.
depth, and he does have experience. So you don't want guys like that walking out the door. I love and Barry and Brown was one that you may have mentioned. Maybe I missed it there, but another wide receiver that comes over, a guy with a big personality, right, just like Nick Anderson does. LSU has got those bad boy wide receivers. I mean, that's just the way it is. And they got a gunslinger quarterback in Garrett Nussmeier who decided to come back this year, and we'll see what all of that stuff, how that helps the team. The offense, the numbers were pretty good last year, and as far as on a national scale, I expect them to be that way again with Joe Sloan at the offensive coordinator position again, his second year right after Den Brock leaves. So I expect the play calling to get a little bit better. I expect Garrett Nussmeier to get a little bit better. I think the wide receiver room is very similar to what it was last year with the talented guys you had last year with Kyron Lacey and others. And not to mention Aaron Anderson is back. So you've got weapons at the skill positions. You got some young running backs. I feel good about all that stuff. And everybody knows how good the offensive line was for LSU last year. Now you're going to lose some of those guys. That's going to be tough to replace. But I think they've got some dudes. We'll see how they respond. I don't know the first round NFL talents like some of the guys they had last year, but um, it's the defense, man. And
Yeah.
we saw improvement last year. We monitored it here on this channel throughout the season, and there was improvement, and then there was games where it's like the defense kind of took the day off, right? And so we'll see if there's some more consistency there. There's some of your top transfer portal players there in that slide. I should have flipped over to that earlier, but you can always pause it and look at it, guys, or look it up on 24/7 if you wanted to. Um, Wide receivers and secondary and edge players is like the majority of what they went after. And I think those were just some of the best available players, and that's what LSU took here. And they were able to get the number one transfer class in the country. And by the way, 2025, they've got the 10th best recruiting class. Yeah, 2 5 stars, 19 4 stars, had a few 3 stars as well. So you put all that together, and I think you've got a very talented roster. There's no doubt about that. But as far as 10th in the country, as far as recruiting, I mean, we all know what that means in the SEC, though, right, Mason? I mean, that's going to
Yeah.
put you probably seventh, sixth, or seventh, in the
Yeah.
SEC as far as recruiting goes. So 10th is good. It's not great, right? Especially if you were a ACC team or you were a Big 12 team, it would be great. It would be considered a great class. But at LSU and in the SEC, I would give that like a B grade, for LSU as far as the high school recruiting goes. Um, let's talk about the
Well,
schedule
and
here for a
and
minute.
hold on,
Go
more
ahead.
more importantly on the high school recruiting, just looking at the recruits that they brought in, we mentioned that they really needed to focus on defensive line. Well, they didn't really address that in the high school ranks at least. Four of
Yeah.
their bottom five recruits were defensive linemen, and they didn't sign any above that. So all 3 stars that are coming in, not to say that they can't be future five, or future first round picks or anything like that, but um, they didn't really go out and get a big name. And I know that they exist in the state of Louisiana, but they didn't get any defensive linemen out of the state of Louisiana. So maybe a down year for the state. I'm not that deep in the weeds when it comes to recruiting, but just looking at it on paper, they did not address the defensive line in the high school rankings like they did other areas. Like you
Yeah.
mentioned running back. Got a 5 star running back and a high 4 star running back coming in. I think DJ Pickett at cornerback is probably a guy that you expect to play um, in some sort of capacity this year.
Hmm.
A true 5 star bona fide guy, but I just think it's important to point out that they really did not address the defensive line like I think that they probably should have. Should have been able to throw a good bit of money at this class, and it doesn't seem like they did that.
Yeah, I agree 100%. Look, they don't have time to sit here and figure it out either, Mason. Looking at this schedule, I pulled it up earlier and was kind of digging through this thing, and all these opponents that I'm about to name, and you see it on your screen, but these are all within the first 6 games of the season, Mason. You got Clemson, Florida, who Florida is going to be better in 25. I don't think there's any doubt about that with DJ Lagway. Then you got to go, or excuse me, it's at Clemson to start the year, okay? And then you've got Florida at home, which is in week 3, or at least the third game of the year. That might be week 4 or something like that. I don't have the dates, but you've got Florida at Ole Miss, and then South Carolina. And those are all within the first 6 games of the year. Kind of following up those, you've got at Vandy, Texas A&M, at Alabama, Arkansas, Western Kentucky, at Oklahoma, who I would think would be better this year with John Mateer coming in at quarterback. But that offense was so bad last year for Oklahoma. It's hard to sit there and put your money on the Sooners having a heck of an offense. But it's at Oklahoma though. At the end of the year, we just saw what Alabama did at the end of the season going to Norman and absolutely just crap down the back of their leg. So there is certainly a possibility that you run into Oklahoma and you're going to play a really good defense that day. We'll see what the offense looks like by that point in the season. But this is not an easy schedule, brother, and there is no easy schedules in the SEC. But again, LSU starts the season off out of conference, and this time it's going to be on the road. So
Mhm.
we know the history. I mean, the last, what is it, 3, 4 years, LSU can't win the first game of the year. And I think it is so important that LSU figures out a way to win that game early in the season, Mason, because it's going to create a lot of momentum if they can do it. We've seen this happen with the Georgia Bulldogs. Georgia and Kirby love playing a big game to start the year because if you win that sucker, you've got momentum. And that's a
Mhm.
big deal to get the team kicked off in the right direction early, early, early. LSU hasn't been able to do that, and it has cost them over the last few years. So with the schedule, I mean, this is going to be a really, really tough one. Luckily, there's 12 teams in the playoff these days. A 10-2 season here would be huge, would be absolutely huge, and would almost certainly put you in the college football playoff, as we've seen this past season, the first year with the 12 team. Barring some kind of crazy scenario where you've got multiple way ties. Um, 10-2 is got to be the target for Brian Kelly and the LSU Tigers in 25. What do you think about the schedule, man?
Yeah, it's a tough schedule. You replace USC with Clemson, then of course you have um, all the same SEC opponents from last year. Wasn't a great year last year. I do expect LSU to be better this year. Just kind of broadly looking at it, we'll go into a deep dive closer to the season, y'all. When
Yeah,
we do a preview of LSU, which should probably drop, I would think, in July at some point. Um, we will go game by game and give you a win loss record prediction for the Tigers. But I think, yeah, broadly speaking, I think 10-2 is probably the ceiling here, which would probably put them in the college football playoff in a 12 team era. But I think 8-4 is very realistic too. It's very possible. You know, looking at this schedule, they could very easily lose to Clemson to start the year. We don't know what Florida's going to be. I have a feeling they're going to be much better, like you said. That could be a loss. Ole Miss could definitely be a loss. I think Austin Simmons is going to be great at quarterback for the Rebels, and then obviously Lenore Sellers and South Carolina. You're talking about facing between Sellers, Simmons, Lagway, and Kate Klubnik for Clemson. Four of what I would probably have in at least in my top 15 quarterbacks for the entire country, if not top 10.
good point.
We have to wait and see out of what we get out of Austin Simmons, but I would venture to guess that by the end of the year we're talking about Austin Simmons as a top 15 quarterback in the country. I feel pretty good about Muck Vick over there playing for the Rebels, the Rebels, excuse me. Um, and then yeah, and then you still have the rest of the schedule to deal with. I think that those 4 out of the first 6 games of the season on that schedule, it's gonna be really tough for them to navigate. And if they can get through that with one loss, yeah, this is a playoff team in my opinion.
Yeah, absolutely. We're going to dive more into LSU as the offseason rolls on. There will be tons of news. We're going to keep you up to date on that the very best we can. Can't wait to talk more LSU. And like you said, we'll be doing our deep dive there in June, July, all that stuff after we watch the spring games and we can really, really put together the rosters after the spring portal. Thank you so much for watching, college football fans. If you made it to the end of this video, you're a college football fanatic just like Mason and I. We hope that you'll consider hitting the subscribe button and coming and hanging out with us here on the First and Long College Football Show. This video was a clip from a live show, one of our many live shows. We do one, at least one every single week, obviously, throughout the season. We do multiple. We want you to come be part of that. And it doesn't matter who you're a fan of. Come and join us. We have a great time in the chat. We got fans from all the way from Boise State to the Florida Gators to the Tennessee Volunteers, all the way out to the USC Trojans. We are your wall-to-wall Power 4 college football coverage go-to, and we have a lot of fun doing it. So thank you so much for watching. We hope to see you around the channel.